All right, hello YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's time once again. Let's talk metal. Tonight, we're going to go through the discography of one of the all-time greats, SAVATAGE. This is one of the seminal American heavy metal bands from the 1980s. They don't get mentioned a huge amount anymore. They don't get quite the same love and veneration as some other bands do. Part of that is that they changed their sound and direction during the 1990s, and they kind of sputtered out in the earliest 2000s, following along with other projects instead. And as such, things have been very quiet on the SAVATAGE front for the past couple of decades. Members have been active, of course, in Trans Siberian Orchestra. That's been the big success story for their career. But SAVATAGE has kind of started to fade into legend and to myth, and I think that's a mistake because they're one of my favorite bands of all time. They did a huge amount of killer material over the years, and there are rumblings that more stuff may be on the way at some point. We can only hope. So I thought tonight we would spend a little time working our way through the SAVATAGE catalog with some thoughts and reflections on all the great material they've released over the years. Now, I'm doing this in presentation style because I don't own every single SAVATAGE album anymore, and it's always a little awkward to show a couple of albums and then have a couple that you can't show. So I figured, screw it, we'll just do it this way, and that'll work just fine. So let's start where else but in the beginning. SAVATAGE has some history before the band started up. The band, of course, has revolved around brothers John and Chris for the first half of their existence. And they first recorded a piece of vinyl when they were with a band called Metropolis back in the late 70s. This is a pretty rare single. You don't see it come up too often. If I remember correctly, it actually has Chris playing bass instead of guitar on it. It's not really a heavy metal item. If it's been years since I heard it, and I really don't have any distinct memories of it other than thinking like, that's okay. It's a cool collector's piece. If you're a completist and you want to track down sort of a uber obscurity, probably have to spend a fair amount of money for it. There you go. This is kind of where John and Chris got their start. But things would take on a decidedly more metallic direction when they got into the 1980s and started working together under the name Avatar. They, of course, Florida band from the Sunshine State, and worked originally with Par Records, which was a small record label run out of a Florida area record store. Par had some good releases early on, not only working with SAVATAGE, but they released the first Pretty Maids EP in the United States before they got picked up by CBS. And they had some other nice items come out on Par also. John and Chris got their first vinyl out under the name Avatar as a 7-inch EP entitled City Beneath the Surface. It came in a very distinctive red picture sleeve, which is shown here. I've done a separate video about the Avatar EP. Some copies of it came on yellow vinyl, and those are incredibly rare and hard to track down. For the full story on that, feel free to dig back through my previous videos and look for the one that talks about a single bringing $9,000. It's kind of hard to miss. But we're not going really deep on that one tonight. The Avatar EP already shows what the blueprint for SAVATAGE was going to be once they changed their name and adopted that more distinctive moniker. In fact, all 3 songs included on the EP would turn up on the first couple of SAVATAGE releases. So there's really no surprise here in terms of what the EP sounds like. There has been at least one anthology collection done of other Avatar demos from that period. I believe they had a couple of tracks on an old local area radio FM vinyl compilation album. Some of the tracks are definitely in a little bit more of a straightforward kind of rock metal hybrid direction. But the tracks on the EP are showing they're quickly developing their metal roots. And one thing that's very distinctive about Avatar and early SAVATAGE is that they have a much darker sound than what a lot of American heavy metal bands were developing this early. This again is pre thrash and pre death metal and stuff. Things like Metallica and Slayer were just finding their feet around 1983. A lot of bands were still operating in a little bit more of a brighter soundscape, again using more elements of rock and metal, things like Twisted Sister being popular and such. But Sabotage always had a kind of a little darker, meaner sound to them. The way I heard it put best, and I don't remember who phrased it this way, but they said that while lots of traditional heavy metal bands from this era were singing about knights and dragons and swords and castles, Sabotage was always singing about the dungeons. And that just sums it up right there. They always have that sound that's kind of lurking a little bit beneath the surface. John's vocals had a lot to do with it. He's a very charismatic singer, could do, just, these very kind of, twisted kind of sneers that definitely, didn't have you thinking of, heroes riding enchanted Pegasus to save the princess with, the enchanted blah, blah, blah. And you think of things crawling and lurking around in the basements and the dungeons and the sewers, and it worked very well. So they would adopt the much more distinctive name of Sabotage by the time they put out their first album, which was Sirens in 1983. The original pressing on Par Records had the distinctive blue cover with the big sailing ship on it. Some copies came on blue vinyl, always been a real hard one to find on that particular colored vinyl variant. The album, when it would get reissued later on, had also a very distinct cover with the creepy, I'm going with creepy elf children because of the kind of pointy ears. Not sure why you've got a bunch of creepy elf children with knives crawling around in something that looks like a sewer system, but the picture definitely kind of fits the vibe of what Sabotage was going for. Once again, no big, heroic knight fantasy kind of stuff here. Definitely working after dark, Sabotage was. A lot of people really love the Sirens LP. For me, it's a good album. It's not my favorite in their catalog. The title track is a monster. It's heavy, it's catchy, it's incredibly doomy sounding. Classic staple that they've played live for years and years. It's an instant classic of a track. Some other tracks on it are good too. Holocaust is pretty good. I like the track I Believe. Twisted Little Sister stands out, although it kind of stands out for having slightly sort of demented lyrics. Sabotage sometimes would stray into lyrics that were somewhat sleazy, and that was never their strongest suit. Even those songs sometimes had it, coming from a little bit more, of a, twisted, darker, BDSM kind of image or whatever, rather than just being, cool girls, 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 and all that stuff. But nevertheless, I never thought those tracks were among Sabotage's best. So I consider it a good debut album, but it's a band that's still finding their voice. Other people herald this as a classic, and that's quite okay. If they like it that much, awesome. Sabotage would waste no time following up with an EP called The Dungeons Are Calling in 1984. This one has 6 tracks. 6 tracks technically. So again, it's kind of mini LP, very long EP type territory. Weird cover with, I always considered, turkey baster through the eye socket. Sure. Whatever the heck it is, always a little weird looking, even on the original vinyl. The EP here, I think, was a good bit stronger. This material's recorded very much around the same time. This is using some tracks from that old Avatar EP, City Beneath the Surface, and The Whip make an appearance here. But you've got lots of other good songs too. Dungeons itself is a very good track. By the Grace of the Witch has a very kind of haunting, eerie vibe to it, but it's kind of a catchy, bouncy beat at the same time. Great track. Visions is strong. Midas Night is excellent. Just a top-notch release, start to finish. Much stronger, more consistent set of songs compared to Sirens, at least in my opinion. So the band's doing very well. They, of course, were picked up by Atlantic Records. And so this was one of the big early success stories, exactly what every 17-year-old, with a guitar was dreaming of doing back then. Putting together the band, putting something out, and then getting snapped up by a major label. And so the releases would keep on coming. Savatage put out this album, Power of the Night, in 1985. And this album is a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde affair. It has some incredibly good tracks on it. And once again, some incredibly kind of dark, slightly twisted tracks, considering their, major label material. But it also has a few clunkers on it. It starts off very good. The title track, Power of the Night, is one of their real anthems. Absolute fist-pumping, headbanger. Can't argue with it all. The track Unusual, again, has that kind of creepy, demented, slightly mentally disturbed vibe to it. Warriors has this big, grandiose, anthemic thing going for it. Very epic in structure, like it a lot. The track Necrophilia, how many times are you going to hear a track title like that on some big label release? So that one's pretty cool. Washed Out is a pretty fast, aggressive pounder, like that one a lot. Hard for Love is an odd one. This again is where the lyrics get a little, probably not the right direction to stray into. The song is kind of catchy. It will kind of stick with you. Whether this is, the major label influence, looking for something with more radio play than a song called Necrophilia, it could be. Not a bad track. Now, some people definitely will start to poo-poo some of this material a little bit. The album slides a little bit on side two, in my opinion. Fountain of Youth never struck with me a whole lot. Skull Session, though, isn't bad. You've got Stuck on You, and In the Dream is a little bit, again, prettier, more ballady. Not a bad track, but definitely, very, very different from what you heard with the first several songs on the album. So the album's a little bit schizophrenic. I do like it overall. I think it's a very good album, but yeah, it has its detractors, and I understand why. It is not a perfect album by any stretch. All right, the band kept chugging right along. We've had a release per year, and that would continue into 1986. 1986, widely considered one of the best years for heavy metal releases ever. And there's a ton of great ones that are on the list from the year 1986. This album is not one of them. In 1986, Savatage released Fight for the Rock, which is almost universally heralded as their worst moment. They have a lineup change here. It's the introduction of Johnny Lee Middleton on bass. And I don't know what to say about this. Sure, throw the new guy under the bus. Even just the cover image itself kind of gives you one of those what the hell moments. You're kind of reenacting the Iwo Jima thing. It's kind of, dark gray, cloudy sky, rocks, people crunched down. It's got some elements that look kind of Savatage, but then you've got, wannabe G.I. Joe there in the middle, hoisting the flag. This is just not a good album. This album reeks of label interference. I'm hard pressed to find much of anything I like on this album. I guess the title track is passable. It's very much meant to be a sing-along anthem, fight for the rock and roll, maybe. Really stands out in Savatage's career as just a total miss compared to everything else they did. Again, this came out, several years before I was into heavy metal. I can only imagine what, the dedicated Savatage fan base was thinking when they heard this thing come out. They had to be worried for the future of the band, But fear not, they would bounce back, and they would bounce back strong. In 1987, once again, sticking to one release per year, when they would put out this album, Hall of the Mountain King. And this, for me, is one of the best albums from the 1980s heavy metal scene. This is an absolute monster of a record. You can almost hear the band saying, you know what? Fuck it. That last album was a mess. The label is trying to force us into this groove that we just don't fit. Let's do what we do best. Let's make it dark and sinister and kind of crazy, fucked up, demented sounding, and just go all in on it. It starts off right away with a very kind of uniquely arranged song. And 24 hours ago, it's got kind of a weird jerky structure, but it works to it. John's vocals sound absolutely deranged in a good way right off the bat. You're hearing, Chris at his finest in terms of guitar work. Chris has always been one of my favorite guitarists. SAVATAGE, always traditionally functioned as a four-man unit, and it was one of those rare cases where even though there was only one guitarist in the band, it always sounded like there were two. Chris was just so good at keeping the rhythm sections and the rhythm parts going, and also just shredding apart the lead parts that you always thought there must have been two guys to get that much guitar work crammed into these tracks. But yeah, just all the tracks are Beyond the Doors of the Dark, just dark, foreboding, menacing. Legions sounds great. Strange Wings is one some people do not like. It's a little simpler in structure, but I think it's very catchy, very anthemic. I actually love the track. I think it's put together very, very well. Then, of course, you have the Prelude to Madness using, the classical, Mountain King intro to Hall of the Mountain King, which is another one of their just absolute anthems. This is a timeless track, pure 1980s heavy metal goodness. Even as you go down the stretch, Price You Pay is fine. White Witch is just a really good one, more up-tempo. And it closes out, with Devastation, which is, again, just heavy. It's dark. It's everything that's just, bleak and wrong and underground in heavy metal. It is a fantastic album. If somebody was going to own only one of the 1980s era SAVATAGE albums, this is easily the one I'd recommend. Hands down, no contest. Take it over Power of the Night, take it over Sirens. This album really exemplifies the perfect SAVATAGE sound. Now, the rigors of putting out an album every year, going out and touring for them, was starting to take a toll. The band had apparently a well-deserved reputation for partying very hard on the road. I remember some interviews and commentaries from way back in the day stating that SAVATAGE, the guys here were some of the few musicians who could keep up with Dave Mustaine and company when it came to getting down with the substances, should we say. And that was starting to pile up a bit. Now, one other thing we should mention before we move off of Mountain King is this did see the introduction of a new person helping produce in the form of Paul O'Neill. Paul would play a big role in sort of helping the band reshape themselves a little bit. They would take 1988 off, start to get their heads together a little bit, and the party's got to end sometime. But they would come back in 1989 with an album called Gutter Ballet. And right away, you can start to get the sense aesthetically there's something a little different here. This is a transitional album for SAVATAGE. There are still tracks that are solid 1980s heavy metal that still have this dark and demented vibe that we've come to know and love. Opener of Rage and War kind of fits that vibe still pretty nicely. You've got She's in Love. You've got Hounds, which has that slower, very doomy wailing to it. It's really good. Mentally Yours has that twisted, demented visage all over it. Um, there's a bonus track, Thorns Shuffle, which kind of fits that, although I think it's kind of a little bit little too slow for its own good. It drags a little bit. So you still have a lot of songs that are in that more classic Sabotage vein, but you also start to get songs that have more ambitious leanings going on compositionally. You get several of them here with Gutter Ballet itself. There's piano parts coming in. The songs are more tightly arranged. They're going for something that's slightly more orchestral sounding. You get it again on, let's see, the excellent When the Crowds Are Gone. Lyrically, these songs are very soul searching. You really can kind of feel, the band trying to work through their personal demons and trying to figure out, where do we go from here and how do we kind of dig ourselves out of this mess. It's a brilliant song. It really strikes a chord with me. Love it a lot. The closer, other than the bonus track Summer Rain, is very much in that same mold. The band is kind of building these songs up a lot more, and they're definitely, Paul O'Neill had a hand in that. His background was very much more, sort of along, these bigger musical production kind of things, and reportedly he saw a lot of talent in John and Chris, and thus a very fruitful collaboration was born. So Gutter Ballet, it's a long album. They probably could have trimmed a few tracks off of this to tighten it up a bit, but it, has that strong transitional vibe. They're still making some songs that, could have fit in on maybe, Mountain King or Power of the Night, but they're also starting to forge into a much more unique direction. This is well before anything like, symphonic power metal was a thing. And these tracks like Summer's Rain and Gutter Ballet, I don't think they would qualify as symphonic power metal necessarily, but they're taking on that kind of more ambitious approach. They want to build something that sounds more Broadway-like to a degree. And they would really take that ball and run with it on their next album, which was 1991's Streets, a rock opera. And this is exactly what it is. It is a concept album. It tells a story from start to finish, and it probably is to some sense autobiographical. It runs parallel to the story told on Wasp's Crimson Idol. So again, it's kind of, the rise to success as a big rock star, but getting quickly bogged down and twisted up in all of the excesses that come with that kind of success, and crashing and burning very hard, and then having to find a way to pick yourself back up and put pieces back together and try to fix the things that have been broken. And Crimson Idol does an excellent job at telling that story. Streets does it incredibly well too. This is an amazing album. It's one of my favorite concept albums of all time. Again, the musicianship front to back is just top notch. John's vocals, you can tell he's pouring his heart and soul into this. There's a lot of songs on here that very directly are talking to God. They're prayers. They're asking for assistance, searching for guidance, looking for meaning in senseless deaths, in wasted youth, trying to find some kind of inner peace, which the protagonist of the story finally does at the end. You can almost imagine this being played over the scene from Forrest Gump, where Lieutenant Dan is finally able to make amends with Forrest, jumps off the boat and is just kind of floating there in the Gulf of Mexico, and has found his center once again. And that's what this album is about. Is one musician's journey to find their center, make peace with the universe after all the tumultuous things of, the up and downs of the ridiculous, excessive rock star lifestyle. It is an incredibly emotive, well done album. It is one of my favorite releases from the entire decade of the 1990s. And I cannot for the life of me understand why it has such a bad score on Metal Archives. Metal Archive scores, you take them for what you will. But, to have some of the earlier albums, ranked way up in the 90s, this album has something like 9 reviews and like a 59% rating. Get over yourself, people. This is a beautiful and brilliantly composed album. No, it is not Mountain King Part 2. And I would guess that is what most people's gripe is. The band is in a completely different place now. Some people aren't going to like that. I get it. But you can't compare this to Sirens or Power of the Night. And it's not the same musical style at all. Comparing it to those albums makes no sense whatsoever. The only thing they really have in common are some of the members and the logo. But, it's kind of like, the Death Catalog, trying to compare Scream Bloody Gore to something like Symbolic or Individual Thought Patterns. They're in completely different universes. Excellent album, amazing album, start to finish. All right. The band would come back in 1993, but with an important lineup change. At this point, John had decided he was going to kind of take more of a behind-the-scenes role in the band. He was still very active with songwriting and arranging and assisting, but they had to recruit a new vocalist, and one they recruited was named Zach Stevens. Zach has a very good voice, very strong melodic voice, good singer. It's very, very different from John's voice, however, and that took some getting used to. I was very excited when this album was coming out. I was already head over heels, a huge SAVATAGE fan. Didn't have all their albums at this point, but I had several of them. And yeah, we all heard that, well, John's not going to sing on this. I was like, geez, that's going to be weird. What will it be like? Excuse me. Well, when Edge of Thorns came out in 1993, it was sort of a mixed bag. Personally, I like the album overall. Again, I think Zach's a good singer. I don't mind his vocals at all. He has a much warmer voice. He doesn't have that, weird, twisted, off-kilter type of voice or range. He doesn't have the same kind of range, period, that John does. But, his voice is still very strong, can be emotive. He's a little closer maybe to sort of the John Bush vocal styling than what SAVATAGE had used formerly. The downside here, I guess, is that they're just you're following up this amazing concept album that basically kind of laid your soul bare. Where do you go from there? Well, you go back to making an album with just conventional songs on it, and it's going to feel a little odd, which this one does. While I like the album overall, it doesn't necessarily have a ton of what you'd consider classic SAVATAGE tunes. I like Edge of Thorns quite a bit. The title track is the opener. Some of the other ones, Lights Out is a better, faster number. It's a little shorter. Ones like He Carves His Stone and Scraggy's Tomb, these are slower, a little more on the contemplative side. But again, there's not this concept tying things together like there was on the last album. Degrees of Sanity, Conversation Piece follow in suit. Conversation Piece is a good track. I like that one. Closer Sleep is an acoustic number, a little different for the band. Miles Away, Damien, they're decent tracks. Yeah, I think this is an album that it works better as a whole than the individual sum of its parts would lead you to believe. Individually, none of these songs, other than maybe Edge of Thorns, is really prime classic SAVATAGE material. But as a complete track list, it's pretty solid. Gorgeous cover art, liked it quite a bit, a little different for the band. The album's also, it has a little bit of a strange spot in my heart because it was another spring 1993 release, and that was the season where it was clear that heavy metal was getting a little weird. And I've talked about this phenomena in other videos. This was the season where it was very clear, that Metallica had gone off in a different direction on the Black Album, and then in '92, Megadeth had followed suit with the horrible Countdown to Extinction, and it kind of the Testament had put out the Ritual, which was kind of a boring thrash album. Thrash's days felt very numbered by that point. Grunge was coming in, so all of the hair metal bands, their days were very numbered heading into '93. It felt like in early '93 we were really looking for a savior. We were looking for those big heavy metal heroes to come out and plant the flag and release something really awesome, and it just didn't happen. Yet Overkill released the very melancholy I Hear Black. You had Sabotage release this album, which, again, while I think it's a pretty good album overall, the fact that it was kind of like, okay, back to just doing standalone songs. The production is over. The Broadway show of Streets has closed down. And so it's kind of back to business as usual, but we gotta break in a new vocalist. John's not part of the actual vocal performance. Again, you really had this feeling in the spring of '93 that the heavy metal landscape was changing a lot, and not necessarily for the better. And things would kind of continue to get not better for Sabotage, not because of a musical direction, but because of a personal disaster when Chris was killed in a motorcycle accident, reportedly killed by a drunk driver. And so this here's another huge blow to heavy metal fans, to the band. As I mentioned before, incredibly talented guitarist, loved him to death. And I remember hearing the announcement on MTV when it occurred, and just horrible sinking feeling to have that occur. So somebody to have it occur to anybody is terrible. To have it occur to a really talented musician whose work you just adored, that sucked pretty bad. The band would not rest long, though. They would get another album out in '94 called Handful of Rain. This one follows suit from where Edge of Thorns had started working the new lineup into this '90s sound. Again, there's no going back to Mountain King material here or anything like that. This album, when it came out, you very much got the sense that it was meant to be a tribute to Chris. It was the band members' way of trying to process and deal with that loss. The closing track, Alone You Breathe, is very much straightforward, a song about what had happened, and they're kind of wishing him well into his next life, whatever comes beyond. The album, for the guitar parts, Alex Skolnick filled in and of course did a fantastic job. The band lists still the full lineup of Zach Stevens, Steve Wacholtz, longtime drummer, Johnny Lee Middleton on bass, and Skolnick. Reportedly, though, the entire album is performed by John, except for some of the guitar work and the guitar solos done by Alex. Whether this was just sort of John's own project to work through the loss. The other guys maybe had stepped aside. The band was members were all still depicted as part of it. Apparently, some pressings actually show Jeff Plate was already in the band, replacing Steve on drums. But regardless, apparently it was pretty much all recorded by John. And again, if you don't like '90s era Sabotage, then this isn't for you. I think it's a really strong album. It's very good in this '90s Sabotage style, which again, some people have heard call it like AOR. That's a gross overstatement. There's still metallic underpinnings to this material, but yes, it's more mature, it's more thoughtful, it's more introspective. It's gone more in the direction, it's not proggy like Dream Theater, but it's in the direction that bands like Queensryche had gone by this time. of being sort of, a more mature sound. Tracks on here. Taunting Cobras is a surprisingly aggressive opener. Handful of Rain, nice song. The song Chance is worth pointing out. It's one where they started dealing with a lot of counterpoint in vocals, adding multiple layers where they would sing voices that little short verses that would play off of each other. If I remember right, the song Chance, it's kind of about Schindler's List. And apologies if I'm getting that slightly wrong, but it's, the idea that yes, you've got, an opportunity to save people and but it comes at great risk to yourself. And you have to kind of, decide. It's the different voices playing in their head of whether or not you take this chance. Do you turn a blind eye to it and just take care of your own things? Do you take a chance and try to do something very impactful? It's, a hard question to answer. It's a really cool song. The band would use that same counterpoint device on a lot of subsequent songs moving forward. So this is kind of the first time they tried that out. Other good ones on here. Castles Burning is a cool track. You've got Watching You Fall. Again, you can tell a lot of these songs, have to do with Chris's passing as an underlying theme here. And in the closer, Alone You Breathe is, very, very moving and has elements, reuses some of the lyrics from things like Streets in the context of Chris passing away. So really good album if you like this era of Savatage. So again, the band was going through some lineup changes and obviously some very painful moments at this point, but they would have an album come out again in 95. Lineup very different at this point. Al Pitrelli's in on guitar. I want to say, and I should have double checked this, I want to say this is the one where longtime live guitarist Chris Cafferty was playing on a studio recording for the first time. He had been with them in the live environment going back to at least the Gutter Ballet days, and I believe he was credited as a member on Gutter Ballet, but actually did not play on the album in the studio, only when they went out and toured for it. Anyway, 95, Dead Winter Dead came out in the dead of winter. I believe it came out in January of that year, January or February. It was early in 95. I remember because I had to trudge through a few feet of snow to walk downtown to the indie record store to try to buy it the day it came out. The weather sucked. I actually called the store to see if they got it in, and they said, nope, sorry, we didn't get it. But the person I talked to wasn't the fellow Jim who typically stocked the store and knew the stuff. So I was like, well, that's a little odd that they wouldn't have gotten that and had it out today. It's like, maybe they overlooked it. Maybe this person didn't hear me. Maybe they hadn't unpacked everything from the morning and gotten it on the shelf. So I still walked down there after lunch. And sure enough, trudging through several feet of snow, they did have it on the shelf. And I bought it the day it came out. Dead Winter Dead is another concept album. So they're doing another story with Paul O'Neill heavily involved in these things. This one is set during the Bosnian-Herzegovinian Civil War. And it's kind of a Romeo and Juliet tale of two people who are on opposite sides of that conflict and, trying to, just survive and connect with one another in the midst of, genocide and the insanity that's going on with that. It's a well done concept album. It works quite well. It over time has gotten very overshadowed because it's where the band first recorded Christmas Eve Sarajevo, which is better known now as the Carol of the Bells. The song was redone on the first Trans Siberian Orchestra album a year or two after this, and has become an international staple of the holiday season. But it traces its roots back to this concept album about two people falling in love in the middle of a genocide. So happy holidays, everyone. What do you say? Again, it's a good concept album. There's not a ton of tracks that stand out. They use the counterpoint thing again, and it works pretty well. Some of the songs individually are fine. They do a pretty good job of, again, starting off, the album seems, very hopeful, uplifting with, the point of view right after the fall of the Iron Curtain. But then, of course, things quickly go haywire. John does guest vocals again as only he can, sort of covering the sections where, again, yeah, more sinister people with ulterior motives are taking things in a very dark direction, unfortunately. So pretty cool album overall. It's not one I go back and play very often at all anymore, start to finish. I played it a lot when it came out, kind of had my fill of it, but it is a good album. It's also, in my opinion, SAVATAGE's last good album. And with this one, it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with the lineup at this stage or anything, but the band starts to get stuck in a rut, and unfortunately, they're about to run out of that creative gasoline that has gotten them so far along. This is also the point where they leave Atlantic Records. So they've been on a major label all the way up through Dead Winter Dead. But 2 years later, when the next album comes out, it's not on Atlantic. It's on, I believe, originally Concrete Records. Speaking to the fact that, yeah, even some of the giants from the 80s, like SAVATAGE, by the time you get past the mid-90s, these bands were struggling to get much attention, especially in the United States. And so in 1997, SAVATAGE released The Wake of Magellan to very little fanfare. I didn't even know this was coming out. Again, from somebody who was, trudging, through the snow and had bought the last 3 albums the very day they came out. Didn't even know this was released. I saw it at a record show. I was looking, I was like, what the hell is this? And I stared at it long enough to put 2 and 3 together and figure out that it actually is a new SAVATAGE album. Okay, bought it, took it home, played it. This is another concept album. And the problem here is that you start to feel like you've been here before. And this one is talking about, once again, someone looking at the world through weary eyes. They've experienced loss. They've seen a little too much. They're kind of on this beach trying to figure things out, and just doesn't feel like the album goes anywhere. The story kind of just sits there on the beach a lot, thinking a lot. There's no hero's journey here like there was on Streets. There's no, saga to unfold like there was on Dead Winter Dead. It's like, nope, dude sitting on a beach, thinking thoughts. Life is hard, kind of sad. Maybe I should walk to the other end of the beach and think the same thing. Yeah, it's a tough sell. It is not a horrible album. There's a few tracks on it I like, but it just doesn't go anywhere. You really feel like, at this point, even with Paul O'Neill still in the mix, that they're kind of retelling the same type of story, but they've run out of good, engaging ways to tell that story. And that's not a good sign. So some people liked Wake of Magellan. When I played this for some friends and stuff, they were like, wow, that's actually it's pretty cool. They would go and pick it up too. But it's not an album that is aged well, and it never had really climbed that high in the rankings to begin with. So what can you say? It always bothered me too. They don't even use the classic SAVATAGE logo here. And again, maybe that's just reflecting that they know they're miles away. Pun intended. Some of you just caught that. From the old days and the old sound, but yeah, it even makes the album cover look a little plain in comparison to older efforts. So again, while this was going on, Trans Siberian Orchestra becomes a thing and takes off rapidly, and the band finds levels of success they never have achieved or ever would achieve with SAVATAGE. Let's be honest, as much as I love them, Trans Siberian Orchestra is like this. SAVATAGE is like this. In the grand scheme of musical success, one of these things is going to pay your bills and let you do this full time and have job security and financial security. And one of these things is kind of seems like it's sputtering to a halt a bit. Nevertheless, SAVATAGE would get one more album out in 2001, the only thing they released in the 21st century, Poets and Madmen, shown here. This one, again, there was some hype when this was released. There was a little more effort put into promoting this one. but they run into the same problems here. First off, I didn't think the cover art was particularly well done. It does have the logo at least, but the art style feels a little wrong. It feels a little cheaply done, which, a band of this level, this deep into their career, you shouldn't have like a cheaply done album cover. And you start listening to the album, and once again, it's a concept album. And this time it's about a photojournalist who has covered things in wars, and he's seen some stuff, man, and it's gotten him kind of sad. And so he's trying to process things and thinking thoughts about life and how it's kind of dark and kind of a bummer sometimes. And it just does it for the whole fucking album again. It's like, didn't you just do this exact same story with a guy on a beach instead of a guy with a camera? They're out of ideas. They're just out of ideas here. They've got an idea. They have one idea and they're reusing it now way too much. This album never impressed me much. I bought it hopeful, but also after Wake of Magellan, I tempered my expectations going to this album, and I was still kind of disappointed. There were one or two individual songs I thought stood out fairly well, but for the most part, this was just the same old story done yet again, and it didn't really catch my interest. And after this, SAVATAGE was kind of quietly put, not ever officially, shut down, disbanded, we hate each other, different musical directions, blah, blah, blah. But Trans Siberian Orchestra was the way forward for the musicians. They understood that. I think most fans understood that too, that at this point, there just wasn't anything else SAVATAGE could offer to the heavy metal audience or to the progressive metal audience. Whoever was still listening to SAVATAGE, they had run their race. And that is the end of the story. So it's a band that did a lot of classic stuff, but eventually, like most bands do, you eventually run out of things to say, and you can't just keep saying the same thing over and over. I guess unless you're Lemmy or Angus Young, maybe. Most bands, though, yeah, you can only get so much mileage out of the same story over and over. Again, there have been rumors and rumblings in recent years about SAVATAGE putting something out once more, which would be very cool and interesting to see. But it's been over 2 decades, and you got to wonder, what would they do? Do we want to hear Mountain King Part 2? I don't know. That would be very strange, considering that's not where they left off with the end of their career. They had moved on from that a long time before SAVATAGE came to an end. Would that be weird? Maybe they could pull it off. It might be good. It might be sort of a Judas Priest firepower kind of moment where they could show that, hey, we've still got the chops to, do it like we used to do it in the 80s. Would they try to pick up with this style they adopted through the 1990s? Would they do like another Edge of Thorns type album, or where it's the more introspective, mature, adult sounding heavy metal? I don't know. They could do that pretty well. Would they try to write another concept album? That would be interesting. I think they would have to get away from this narrative that they've done too many times. And if they do another one of these sad guy thinking sad thoughts, they've gone to that well too many times already. Could they really make that interesting? I would be very, very worried if I found out they went in that direction. Would they try to come up with a completely different concept and do something? I don't know. Could be interesting. What would they do? They've had 20 years to come up with a different idea, so it's always possible. Would they try to redo the autobiographical thing and take another spin at something like Streets from a different perspective, the way that Wasp redid the Crimson Idol with the Neon God albums? Frankly, I didn't find that very interesting when Blackie did it with Wasp. It's like, you've already told this story, you told it better, and you didn't drag it out over 2 albums. So is there any need to revisit Streets? It's damn near perfect as is. I don't think you could really add to that experience. So yeah, I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know what Sabotage would do moving forward if they tried again. But at the same time, it would be interesting. As a big fan of most of their catalog, you kind of would like to see them take one more stab at it and come back and do something really strong. Um, the talent's always been there. I don't know. So since I don't know what else to say here, I think it's time we wrap this one up. And let's talk metal in the comments down below. Where are the legions? Where are the Sabotage fans? Who out there are among the Mountain Kings? What's your favorite era for the band? I'm guessing for most of you, it's going to be the 1980s era. What do folks think of the 1990s era? Are there some albums in there that you like? Do you just hate that entire sound completely? It's a very different direction. I get it. Not everybody is going to like both eras of the band, but what are your perfect personal favorites along the way? I didn't talk about them, but Sabotage did multiple live albums and some, compilations. A lot of the live albums are actually very, very strong. The ones I've got, I don't know, 2, 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, and they tend to have very good track lists and extremely good performances. Some of the older shows when John was still singing with him, like on the Mountain King tour, great stuff. Do you have personal favorites among their live material, bootleg performances or official ones? Let's talk Sabotage in the comments down below. And with that, let's wrap this video up. So thanks to everybody for watching. Until next time, everybody stay safe. And as always, keep banging your head in the dungeons.